Chapter 20. When we entered the corridor, the upward climb continued. Somehow, I thought the trudge to Caym's lair would involve a more downward progression. I chalked it up to the ideas about heaven and hell from my old world, where good was up and bad was down. I received a system message. "You have discovered the outer maze. 2,200 XP. A golden flash surrounded Amelia, then funneled to the stone ceiling. Your companion, Amelia Horn, has reached level 40. Amelia has learned the class specialty skill, Leaping Reverse Shot. The ranger launches into the air to evade attack, then turns to fire a devastating shot causing 500% weapon damage. Type, ranged attack. Damage, 500% max weapon damage. Cost, 120 energy. Cooldown, 2 minutes. Bonus, plus 30% chance to land critical hits over the next 5 seconds after the ranger lands." "Grats," Brugh nodded. "Nice," the Michonne sisters uttered at the same time. "A blessing from the goddess," Rashawn said with a half-bow. "That's a kick-ass skill," I added. "You want to duel and take it out for a whirl?" Amelia allowed a slight smile. "No, thank you. We still need to find Priya, Giles, and Yakol, and each moment that passes in this sickened place decreases the likelihood we'll find them alive." "You underestimate Giles," Brugh said. "Perhaps, but despite your obvious dominance thus far, you'd do well to remember whose lair you stride toward. The Underlord and the minions closer to his lair will undoubtedly be nothing with which to trifle." "Meh, fair enough, Shining One." He waved a hand ahead. "You want to lead again?" Amelia nodded, then paced uphill. Liatra wrapped her arm in the crook of Rashawn's elbow as they marched in back. I jogged ahead to walk with Amelia. "Hey, it said we'd entered a maze of some kind." "I noticed." She reached into the larger sack tied to her waist. After extracting a dusty black stick, she scraped a directional arrow into the wall. I recalled the stones she'd used to set off the fire trap minutes earlier. "You've got something for everything, don't you?" "Prince Tryon teaches preparation is equally as important as combat skills." "Words to live by," Rashawn interjected. "The light shines on the diligent." "Shh!" Amelia shushed us, then raised a finger to point at the ceiling. Her eyes flicked left and right, then rolled once, like she was deep in thought and searching her brow for answers. An orange glow appeared at the end of the short corridor. It danced on the wall as it glowed brighter. Destiny crept forward, her feet barely making a sound. She raised her sword. A small figure with a torch in one hand slid into view. The glow of its torch illuminated red skin with a white stripe painted across its forehead. It wore a thick wool jacket and matching pants. The figure set a stool down, stepped onto it, then reached for an extinguished torch overhead with the fiery one in its hand. "Surin Torchmaster, level 40 Pinmit. Pinmits are tribal creatures, often found living in tunnels on the continents of Rubal, Mantar, and Hilmaya." Before I could read the stats, the Torchmaster turned and spied Destiny, her sword raised high. It lofted its stool and held the torch in its other hand away from the towering Michonne. A little squeak from his throat rounded out the effect of a high-pitched voice. "Ah, don't mind me. Just doing my business." "So, you're the one who lights the torches?" Brugh asked before I got the chance. Yup, that's me." I nodded. I was wondering how that worked. "Are you armed?" "If you consider a torch armed, I suppose I am. But even if you kill me, the Dark One will just wait for you to pass and bring me back. You can do that, you know." "You mean Caym?" Amelia asked. The Pinmit turned his head like a curious terrier. "Who else would I mean?" "How do you get past the traps?" I asked. "Traps? Oh, you must mean the pit in the East Hall and the fire trap further up." I nodded. "Those are the ones I was thinking of." "The fire stream's right overhead. Sometimes I use it if my torch goes out." "And how do you get across the pit?" The Pinmit spread its stubby arms wide. "I'm quite the jumper. Now may I pass, or should I just go around?" The encounter was strange, and I'd have just as soon gotten on with my mission. Sure." I stepped to one side and waved him through. He nodded and passed. As I watched him go, I shook my head in dismissal before a thought occurred. Hey! The Torchmaster turned, its irises glowing orange in the light of the dancing flames. Yes? What about the other traps? You must have been talking to that crazy old wizard. I disabled those traps ages ago. They were annoying. So they weren't keeping him safe after all. The Torchmaster flicked his wrist. Nah, as far as I know. Caym got bored with chasing after that lunatic long before I showed up. This place is strange, I said. The Torchmaster cackled. And you haven't seen the half of it. Wait until you get into the maze.
Don't suppose you could help direct us through that?
Amelia asked. I nodded in agreement. Your help would be appreciated. The Torchmaster raised the stool in one hand and the torch in the other. What? And give up such a lucrative profession? He shook his head. Sorry, no can do. I'm the last of my kind for a reason, because I mind my own business. Brugh grunted. We could compel you. The little guy surprised us all with a raucous high laughter. Oh, that's rich. You could try, big boy, but good luck catching me. Brugh stepped forward, but I thrust out an arm to hinder his progress. Leave him, big fella. We'll get through with Amelia's chalky stuff. Your call. Brugh turned. Let's go. The sound of his voice is annoying me. When we turned back, the hallway was dark, and a glow inside the right-hand wall was extinguished when a secret door slammed shut. The thud echoed up the corridor and wrapped around us.
Strange,
Amelia mumbled.
I don't like this place,
Machini said. I chuckled. I'm starting to enjoy it. Gah, Rashan spat. A message popped up in my HUD.
Your companion, Priya Sky, has reached level 40. +2 intelligence, +2 constitution. With a disposition of beloved, you may spend 5 attribute points on Priya.
Well, Priya just leveled, wherever she is. Rashan marched by and stopped at the end of the hall.
At least we know she's alive.
She wheeled around and raised her hands on either side.
2 passages. Which way?
I joined her and gazed in both directions. The adjoining corridors lacked any distinguishing features, so I shrugged. You pick. Rashan closed her eyes for a few seconds. Her chest rose high as she filled her lungs with the dank air. Her lips formed a circle when she exhaled. Then she pointed to my left.
That way.
Amelia drew an arrow on the wall. Brugh took the lead this time, and even though we had no reason to trust the Torchmaster had disabled the traps, none of us questioned it. The Elven Ranger returned to her place at the back and, if I was being honest, that's where I liked her. Nothing would sneak up on our healers with her ears alert. The corridors here were more like tunnels with their curved arches, but they were constructed of the same gray stone as the rest. We wound through them for half an hour, avoiding side passages. I drew a rudimentary map in my interface as we progressed, but as I drew, the mixtures of long and short corridors, and the strange way they seemed to snake over each other as we trudged uphill, leveled out, then descended again, left a scribbled mess. Then we came to a crossway where we spied one of Amelia's drawn arrows. We all turned and peered in different directions. Brugh grunted. This is where we entered the outer maze. He pointed toward the torches as if they'd reveal his reasoning. Maybe he remembered their pattern, but I decided to take his word for it instead of asking. Amelia turned and paced back in the direction from which we'd come.
I see it. Come on.
Everyone followed. I jogged to catch up with the elf. You see what?
Where we should have turned.
Why do I think I'm not the only one drawing a map?
Because you aren't.
She glanced up at me.
Do you have any concept of why I'm here?
Perhaps I don't. I thought it was to watch my back. Is that a selfish sentiment? What am I missing?
No, that's exactly why I'm here. But watching your back, as you so eloquently put it, entails seeing you forward. Any mission you undertake is mandated by the Queen to become my own. I've trained since I was a child to serve Prince Tryon. Now that you've replaced him, I'm responsible for your life.
She twisted her lips to one side.
Well, not exactly, since you don't die, but I'm responsible for your mission, whether I lead it or not.
Right now, you're leading it.
Only because I know where to go, and because you allow it.
I shook my head. I lead only when it makes sense, not because I'm the leader.
Idiot,
Rashan said. When I shot her a look over my shoulder, her head twisted side to side.
You are the leader because Solara dropped you in the dark wood and made it so. Just because you allow others to show you a path doesn't mean you don't lead.
Amelia turned.
And yet you have the courage to call Solara's chosen one an idiot? Do you see the conflict in your logic?
Although Rashan didn't show any physical response, her silence spoke volumes. Brugh chuckled, the rumbling sounding something like a lion's purr. Everybody calm down. After all, what does the chosen one care if she calls him names? He threw me a humorous glance. Bend your pecker what the priestess thinks, does it? It probably wouldn't if I didn't respect her opinion of me. I faced forward and marched with Amelia.
Shit,
Rashan said, and that was plenty. Amelia stopped. I took another step. What is it? She raised a finger, then her head dipped.
Voices.
I don't hear anything. She smirked and thumped the tip of one ear.
Your senses are weak, despite the goddess's blessings.
She shot Rashan a look, but it was brief, and then she went back to business.
Come.
We continued for a minute or so, then turned down a corridor to the right. I spied one of her arrows drawn on the wall before we turned, but there were none marking this hallway. So far, so good. The procession stopped for her to home in on the sound again. The elven woman pressed her ear against a stone brick, widened her eyes for a flash, then took off again. The rest of us close on her heels. At the end of the next corridor, she quickly marked the direction we took, then set her ear to the new wall. This time I heard the mumblings. I couldn't make out words, but people nearby were definitely entwined in conversation. Hey, I called out. Yo! Amelia shoved me.
What if they aren't friendly?
Rashan and Brugh shared a look. The warrior shrugged. I'm old and my ears aren't what they once were. The Cine hustled to the wall, then pressed her ear to it.
That's Priya. I'd know her tone anywhere.
Despite Brugh's sentiment of a moment ago, he pressed his ear to the cold stone, but then he stepped back and threw his arms out wide. Get back. We all did, but he grabbed Cine's arm and held her close. Not you. He knocked on the wall once more, then returned to the Michonne. Think of Giles over there, then. His words trailed off as he muttered the rest. Cine closed her eyes, gave a curt nod, then opened them.
It's done.
I flipped my hand. What's done? Brugh ignored me. On the count of 3, activate your charge. Focus on the voice on the other side of the wall for a target. You can target a voice? I asked. Brugh ignored me. 3, 2, 1. Chapter 21. Priya.
Giles dove and rolled forward as Yakol grabbed Priya and shoved her against the opposite wall. His shadow fell over her as he threw his arms out, shielding her body as the wall behind him exploded. Heavy stone debris rained down and clattered on the floor. A peek around the hulking Beastmaster revealed 2 figures who emerged from a cloud of dust that painted their faces and gear. They stood tall as they waved the plumes from their faces. Yakol stepped to the side and signaled his hissing spider to back away from what it had perceived as a threat. The sight of Brugh covered in white was enough for anyone to perceive the warrior that way. "Cine!" Priya charged forward, then threw her arms around her dusty friend. The white powder would stick to her moist robe, but she couldn't have cared less. She muttered in her one-time lover's ear, "I am so pleased to see you." The most familiar male voice in her life rang out.
What am I, chopped liver?
The grit under Cine's chest scratched the skin on Priya's face when her forehead wrinkled. "Chem?" She peered around at the group filing through the hole in the wall, then clapped her hands together. "Everyone's here! We've been walking through this blasted maze for hours. I didn't think we'd ever find you." Gemini pulled her into a tight hug, then gave her a short kiss. Too short for her taste. Then she realized just how much she relied on him to ground her, and the truth hit her like a wave. It's not Rashan I need to ground me. It's him. It was always him. Gemini cocked his head toward Brugh.
Great job. But if my party can't harm each other, how can you still target someone for an attack like that? I challenged her to a duel.
And I challenged Giles.
Destiny said. Gemini peered down to gaze at the orange circle beneath her and Giles's feet, then the other two. His expression morphed, and his ever-present questioning continued.
But don't you have to see a target to attack it?
Priya's heart swelled. That was her man, always inquisitive about the world around him. The things Enorans took for granted were foreign to a mythic. Sometimes it was an endearing attribute, like watching a child learn things about the surrounding world with excitement in his eyes. Other times it was annoying and ill-timed. In this case, she was so elated to see him, it proved the former.
It really is like you were born yesterday,
Brooke said.
If you can hear something in the dark, can you swing your sword at it?
Gemini nodded and muttered.
No line of sight restrictions.
Brooke cast Gemini a cockeyed glance.
Right, there you go.
The low grumble of Caym's growl slipped into her head again.
His holy binding to you cannot staunch the suffering you will endure if you continue on this path. Bring the mythic and leave the rest. I will spare them all, and you will serve under my tutelage as the most powerful pair of beings in all Enora.
Priya ignored the Underlord, but Gemini perked up.
What is it?
Despite the emotional bond they'd shared since the second day they were acquainted, she let her guard down at the sight of him. Although she debated with herself for an instant, there'd been no denying it. She tapped a finger to her temple. Caym is talking to me. He's inside my head. Gemini's face flushed the color of an apple aged just beyond green.
What's he saying? Is he trying to split up our group?
She nodded. It's like you know him.
Yeah, we've met. A few times now.
Right. Unlike Gemini, she didn't have the experience of the multiple magical encounters with the bastard, and regardless of the stories he'd shared about them, she found herself unprepared for having a demon underlord prying around in her mind. So, let me say aloud, screw you, Underlord Caym. We're coming on our own terms, and you will fall at my feet.
Yeah,
Destiny barked and pumped a fist. Her sister repeated the motion, if somewhat awkwardly. Yakul thumped his chest with a tight, gloved fist. Giles and Amelia shared stony glances. Rashawn slipped an arm around Priya's waist and set her head on her shoulder. But Gemini's gaze remained wary. With a concerted effort to level off her mood, Priya showed him a smile, then changed the subject. She slipped the wand from her belt. I ran into a werewolf. This proved inadequate. We'll need to find me another. Her man nodded.
I hope when we finish this little piece of business, the Foundation will grant us the reprieve to rest and see to all our needs for a while. But I know better than to count on it.
Rashawn raised her new weapon. This is not soulbound. Perhaps she should wield it after all. Gemini shook his head.
Her magic is potent enough without the wand. It adds more to your contribution if we need you to burn down an enemy suddenly.
He cocked his chin at Amelia.
But make a mental note that Priya needs a new wand, since you support our long game.
He flashed a mischievous smile, and although Priya didn't understand the joke, she sensed from their emotional attachment that the words were spoken in humor. Amelia pursed her lips.
Done.
She waved in a grandiose gesture that left her arms at her waist, over which she bowed deeply.
My liege.
Destiny flicked a finger.
Another point for me in our battle for Jaren's nightly bath, master.
I guess I deserved that. Anyway.
Gemini clapped his hands together, and a cloud of dust plumed from them.
What's the plan? Did you guys mark your way in?
Giles pointed at the massive hole his companions plowed through the wall.
What's that way? Tombs, traps, a maze? How about where you came from? Where'd you guys end up?
Priya cleared her throat. Some rooms. I passed a few cells filled with skeletons on my way here.
That must be where I came out,
Amelia said. Priya recalled the empty restraints dangling from the stone wall. Oh, so you got out, crossed the lake, and made it through the maze?
Strange thing. A platform rose in the water when I crossed.
Gemini nudged Amelia with his elbow.
So that's why you were wet. You crossed a lake?
Giles stepped into the circle.
I materialized here on one of those platforms, yet we didn't see each other. How is that so? That's strange,
Gemini said. Giles shook his head.
It's foul. It could mean Caym somehow delayed my entrance into the depths.
Rashan perked up. Gemini was stuck in a trance when I entered. He hallucinated an entire sequence of events in a bout of trickery staged by the Underlord. Giles winked his eyes in succession.
As I suspected. What?
Gemini asked.
Check your interface clock.
Priya brought hers up and spied the time. Usually it displayed hours, minutes, and seconds, but the display was frozen. Gemini noticed the same.
What the hell? It seems this place exists outside of time itself.
Liatra, brow furrowed, stepped forward from the back of the party.
How is that possible?
Gemini shrugged.
I'm not a demon underlord. Such things are beyond my frame of reference. But if time doesn't exist here, and Gemini could be set in a trance upon arriving, it's not beyond possibility that my entry was somehow delayed without my knowing.
Rashan nodded her agreement.
The darkness is synonymous with trickery. We must never underestimate the foul magics of which a demon is capable.
Well?
Gemini said.
Whatever powers he wields to bend our perceptions, he wanted us isolated, to keep us separate.
He turned to Rashan.
But he placed you with me from the beginning, which makes me wonder why.
My journey to you was certainly a convoluted trek,
Amelia said. Gemini nodded.
Makes me wonder how in the world you found us at all.
At the time, I had no idea where I was going. I just followed the sounds until I fell upon Machini and Dicini. Then the rest showed up.
How'd you traverse the maze?
She shrugged.
That's a question I've been asking myself. I discovered the maze when you did. I must have come another way.
I wiped out the skeletons, Priya informed her. Gemini winked his eyes in succession, a motion that had become almost imperceivable, but Priya always noticed.
I got an alert you'd leveled.
When we discovered the maze.
I wanted to get your input before I spent your points. What do you think?
Wisdom. I noticed slower mana recovery when using my scythe ability against the skeletons.
All 5?
4. I also had an encounter with a werewolf, so throw in a point of constitution.
Done.
He clapped more dust from his hands.
So, do you all know the way back to this lake? Is there any way to go back there? Or should we look for another track? Maybe the path Amelia followed?
Priya blew dust particles out of her nose. The werewolf was in a corridor where I came out. We could explore that way, now that the party's together.
How'd you get away from it? Or did you kick its ass?
I think Caym called it off, but it's a long story. Gemini eyed Amelia.
Long story, huh? I sense a reoccurring theme.
Priya didn't know what he meant, but it seemed to be something between the two, so she dismissed it. Maybe if we get back to the lake, we could build a fire to dry our clothes, then rest for a while. Giles nodded.
Wise. We should take some time to replenish our food buffs. Then I can stand watch while those in need have a nap. Perhaps we'll discover the purpose of the platforms. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
Gemini replied. Priya locked her arm inside Gemini's.
Off we go, then.
Anything new for you? Priya asked. Other than your own level gained? Gemini nodded, and the hint of a smile curved just at the outside of his lips. His elation came to her in a wave. She tapped the corner of his mouth. You're excited. I can't wait to hear. Brooke stole his thunder.
The Chosen One received boons from the goddess as a reward for reaching level 40. Bonus skills to choose from, sorted in what he calls skill trees.
Priya's head jerked up. And you didn't lead with this? Tell me.
He already gave us the rundown on 2 trees. Maybe if he starts with the one he hasn't revealed yet, we won't be bored to death by the time we face the Underlord.
Assuming we ever find Caym, Amelia muttered.
Oh,
Gemini said.
Don't worry. He'll find us. This is all one big show. Trust me on that.
Perhaps that's the purpose of the platforms,
the elven woman responded. Gemini raised one shoulder in a half shrug.
Not sure how, but it could be.
Priya threw her hands up. Skill trees? Gemini's sexy smile widened, and she felt warm stirrings inside that overwhelmed her impatience of a moment ago.
So, the resource tree is all about attribute points, resources, and my spirit pool. If I spend a point in the attribute branch, I receive an extra point of my primary attribute per level. So, as a Shogun, I'd get an extra point of dexterity. If I spend 2 points in that branch, I also get a constitution point added. More life is quite a boon,
Giles said.
But please continue. At 3 points, I get to assign an elective point anywhere except in the primary 2.
Priya tilted her head. Wait, you're saying these effects are cumulative? That spending the points in all 3 gives you the benefits of all 3 instead of swapping one for the other?
Right. But wait until you hear what happens if I spend all the points across all 3 trees.
When they turned a corner, Giles pointed at a simple arrow he'd carved in the wall, which they followed in reverse.
The primary pool branch is something like this.
Gemini pulled up his interface to explain, and Priya made notes in her own, spelling them out with her own thoughts.
Resource tree. Primary pool expansion branch. Rank 1. In addition to pool increases received by applicable attribute points per level, he gains a 5% increase to his primary resource pool. Rank 2. In addition to pool increases by applicable attribute points per level, he gets a 10% increase to his primary resource pool. Rank 3. In addition to his pool increase by applicable attribute points per level, he gains 15% increase to his primary resource pool.
All valuable,
Giles said.
And the final branch? That one's simpler. For each point spent, I increase the size of my spirit pool by 5%, 10%, and 15% per point spent, non-cumulative. So a max of 15%?
Giles asked.
Right. But now we can come to the bonus for spending 9 points across all 3 resource tree branches.
Gemini paused for effect. Priya rolled her eyes. When he spoke again, she created a separate page of notes in her interface. Bonus. If he spends all 9 points in the resource pool, it increases his resource regeneration rate, including hit points, energy, mana, or shadow mana by 10%. That sounds amazing, she said. Tell me about the others. Brugh threw a look over his shoulder.
It's not necessary. You should spend the points in the elemental tree. Fire, ice, lightning. You'd be dangerous.
Rashan shook her head in disagreement.
As I stated before, you should select the enhancement or the elemental tree related to lightning attacks. Avoidance is important now that you fight at close range, but so is crowd control. The immunities will also prove valuable. I'd start spending points now.
Priya yanked Gemini closer by the crook of his elbow, which she'd been locked to since they reunited. You have 3 points, then?
Yep.
She muttered, deep in thought. I'd save them. Take your time reading over the information, then decide. If you level again, you'll be able to cover 2 branches in whatever trees you choose. Or if we gain 3 levels before we meet Caym, you could fill an entire tree and receive the requisite bonus. Amelia spoke from the back of the pack.
You have a lot of confidence there will be more levels gained between now and Caym?
It was more of a question than a criticism. Considering our past history, I can't rule it out. Liatra interjected.
But you're of a higher level now. More XP is required to advance.
But more gained per quest completed and with the killing of higher-ranked enemies. Priya grinned at Gemini. She and Amelia went at it often, but in a playful enough way to keep it politely competitive, and Gemini's returning grin told her he knew she was just having a go at their elven companion.
Fair enough, Lady Sky.
Amelia didn't bow this time. With a general direction and Giles's decision to use different symbols to mark territory as they traversed the maze, an announcement in which Amelia took heavy interest and no doubt made notes about, they arrived at the lake in a reasonable amount of time. But by the time they arrived, Priya could tell by the way he carried himself that the day's combat and tension weighed on Gemini. As she expected, for each person who tested the water, a platform rose from beneath. They stretched across the lake, from end to end. Gemini gazed at them.
We'll rest on this side. When we're rejuvenated, we can discuss next steps. Agreed,
Giles said.
I will stand watch.
Gemini rolled up one fur and set the back of his head on it while laying atop the other he'd packed in his magic bag. Priya snuggled up in the crook of his arm. She reveled in his warmth and the moment of peace granted by the sound of lapping water as she drifted off to sleep.